My husband has a very particular method that he uses to load the cups and glasses and mugs into the top rack of the dishwasher. I do not subscribe to that method. This has been a subject of a discussion in our marriage for many years, and I'm wondering if other relationships in the room may have similar debates of long standing. Now, we did not know that we had this vast difference in our perception of the world until some years into our relationship. Initially, we didn't live together, and his first apartment didn't even have a dishwasher. So it was only many years into my marriage that I came to find myself standing across the open dishwasher from my husband, playing a very odd game of Chinese checkers where I put a glass in, and then he leapfrogs it over to put it in its proper place. Oh well, I think to myself at those times, this is just my cross to bear. I wonder if you have things like that you think about that way. There's this kid at school who just teases me about everything. That's just my cross to bear. Or I've got this coworker who eats garlic every day at lunch and insists on standing in my cubicle for half the afternoon. It's just my cross to bear. But if you listen to today's reading in Matthew and think about it, you can see pretty quickly that the way I sort of trivialize that saying is totally at odds with what Jesus is saying, his meaning, his intent, when he uses that phrase, take up the cross. When I used it in my dishwasher example, I was really sort of talking about something that fate had placed in my path, and I had to endure it or deal with it. But Jesus is using the phrase in a very different context. First of all, he's not using it trivially, right? It's life or death. He has just finished telling his disciples very precisely when and how he's going to die, which, by the way, were any of them listening? Why were they so surprised a short time later when it all happened exactly as he said it was going to? But that's another sermon. So he just finished describing that. So when he says, take up my cross, it's not a trivial thing. It's life or death. This is the instrument that the system is going to use to kill him in response to his protest against that very system. So it's not a trivial thing. It's a very, very big thing. The other difference I see between my dishwasher example and the use of that phrase and Jesus' use of that phrase is that he's using it proactively. My usage was sort of passive. I will wait until that thing gets dumped in front of me and I'll deal with it. Jesus, on the other hand, is using that phrase to mean very much an active engagement. He perceived things in the system around him that he thought were unjust and unfair, and he acted on them. We see it time and time again, his nonviolent protest, his civil disobedience. He's seeing a system around him and taking charge, ignoring rules of religious authorities in favor of human interaction and healing. So it's not like Jesus is just playing the hand he's been dealt. He's pulling new cards and playing a whole new game. This makes me uncomfortable. I don't like to think about having to look out into the world and find a cross somewhere and pick it up. I'm much more comfortable sort of living in my little life, and when fate dumps something in front of me, I'll figure out how to deal with that. That is more than enough most days, right? That's all. But if we're really going to absorb and think about following this example and accepting this invitation that Jesus makes to us to take up that cross, we're going to have to be a little more proactive than that. Affirmatively seek out that cross and take it up. Also, Jesus is pretty clear in the Gospels. He's thinking this is a pretty regular, repeating occurrence. In fact, in Luke's telling of this same story, the phrase is, take up your cross daily. Yikes, that's kind of a lot of cross picking up. It's also kind of daunting because we can see somewhat scary examples around us as to how this taking up of crosses plays out in the world. One example that comes to my mind is Heather Heyer, the young woman who was run down and killed in Charlottesville, Virginia, by James Allen Fields, Jr., when she was there protesting against the violent racism and anti-Semitism and bigotry that was on display in those protests. She picked up her cross and went to Charlottesville and engaged in that protest. And like Jesus, in exchange for that noble act, she paid with her life. Jesus did much the same thing. He saw the Roman government and the forces that supported it and the religious figures that enabled it around him. He saw that that system was unjust and unfair. He didn't like it. He knew the risks of speaking and acting against it, but he did it anyway. So in the wake of Charlottesville, I wonder if there are going to be other situations, other examples, other times when we might look out and find that cross to take up. Rather horrifically and ominously, in the days right after Charlottesville, the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan was quoted as saying, horrifically, that he was glad Heather Heyer had been killed, and that America should count on, quote, more stuff like this happening. So what if more stuff like that does happen? Is there a cross in there that we might pick up? Maybe it's protest. Maybe it's trying to understand better the political system that led us to this violent impasse and figure out ways to work to change it. Maybe the cross is simply trying to unseat politicians who we feel acquiesce in or endorse that kind of violent hatred. Maybe it's trying to understand the economic and social pressures that bring us as a country to this point of violent hatred and distrust, and then work to ease or change those social and economic pressures. Heather Heyer's dad spoke after her death and said that she had spent her whole life, she'd been very much moved by causes of justice and fairness, so much so that he said she felt compelled to go to Charlottesville and participate in that protest. But when he was mourning his daughter and dealing with her death and speaking well of her, I don't think that was him picking up a cross. However, he went on to say that he felt very strongly that this cycle of violent hatred had to be broken. And as his step in that direction, he said that he forgave the man who ran her over and killed her. Maybe that's how he's picking up a cross, leading by example. So over the rest of this long weekend, I wonder if we can look around and see if we can spot situations or circumstances or events that look to us like they might trigger that strong sense of social justice that Jesus had, that strong preference for love over hate. And if we find one of those that might trigger that, maybe we see if there's a cross in there that we could pick up. Because I have a feeling Jesus' invitation is still open.